Bob Barker hosted The Price is Right for 35 years. He gave away millions in prizes, ended every show with the same gentle message about spaying and neutering pets, and became one of the most trusted faces in American homes. But in his final years, something changed. The stories he started telling did not sound like the man fans thought they knew. Now, years after his death, a new docuseries is bringing those final words back into focus. And what Barker said at the end is not what anyone expected. The hard early years? Bob Barker's story did not begin under studio lights. He was born on December 12, 1923, in Darrington, Washington. When he was very young, everything changed. His father, Byron John Barker, worked as an electrical power foreman. In 1929, that work turned fatal. He fell from a high utility pole and died from his injuries, leaving the family broken. Bob was only 5. That loss pushed the family into poverty during the Great Depression. His mother Matilda struggled as a single mother until her brother-in-law helped her get a teaching job on the Rosebud Indian Reservation in South Dakota. At age 6, Bob was taken into a life that was isolated, rough, and deeply shaped by hardship. What makes this part of his story even more striking is that Bob Barker had roots there. His father had 1/4 Sioux blood, making Bob 1/8 Lakota. The Rosebud Sioux tribe publicly confirmed him as an enrolled member. Those roots were part of his identity, even if most people never knew it. His childhood was nothing soft. He attended the reservation's grade school where his mother taught. The world around them was shaped by Dust Bowl storms that filled the air with dirt. There were no real roads, no electricity, and very little comfort. Even so, those years gave him something lasting. The discipline people later saw on television was forged in a place where survival came first. At the center of that early life stood his mother, Matilda. She was strong, educated, and determined. She became Todd County Superintendent, shaping how children learned. She even wrote a South Dakota history textbook called Our State, published in 1930. At home, she was strict and deeply serious about education. When people later saw Bob Barker as polished, calm, and always in control, they were also seeing his mother's influence. In 1937, Matilda remarried, and the family relocated to Springfield, Missouri. In Missouri, Bob started becoming someone new. At Central High School, he stood out as an athlete, a strong basketball player. That talent carried him to Drury College on scholarship. He studied economics and showed no clear sign he would become a television icon. Then World War II arrived. At age 20, Barker joined the Navy Reserve and trained as a fighter pilot, flying Corsairs. But the war ended before he was sent into battle. After the war, he returned to Drury and graduated summa cum laude in 1947 with a degree in economics. Before the fame, he had already proven himself as a disciplined student. Yet during school, something else pulled him in a new direction. He picked up radio work at KTES-FM. His voice stood out. It had warmth, ease, and natural confidence. What began as a job slowly became a calling. His personal life was also taking shape. He met Dorothy Jo Gideon in high school, and that connection never faded. While he was serving during the war, the two eloped in 1945 during military leave in St. Louis. Dorothy Jo believed in him before success had given anyone a reason. The rise to fame? After college, Barker chased radio more seriously. He went to Palm Beach, Florida, working as a news editor and announcer. Then, in 1949, he made a bold move. He and Dorothy Jo drove cross-country to Los Angeles with just $100. Within a week of arriving, producer Ralph Edwards heard Barker on the radio while driving. Edwards chose him to replace Jack Bailey on Truth or Consequences. No long struggle. One moment where the right person heard the right voice. In 1956, Barker became the host of Truth or Consequences on NBC. The format was strange and funny. Contestants had 1 second to answer a question, and if they failed, they faced ridiculous consequences. Barker was perfect for it. He could guide chaos without losing his calm. He hosted 3,524 consecutive episodes over 18 years. Guinness recognized him as television's most durable performer. Then, in 1972, Barker became the host of The Price is Right. The show already existed, but was hardly a cultural giant. Under Barker, it became louder, faster, and far more exciting. Pricing games, giant prizes, ringing bells, and that unforgettable feeling that an ordinary person's life might suddenly change in front of millions. What made it work was Barker himself. He had a smooth, playful way of talking to strangers that made the whole thing feel warm instead of mechanical. He turned a simple pricing game into a daily ritual that families watched together for decades. The darkness behind the smile. In 1994, the image Bob Barker had spent years building suddenly cracked. Diane Parkinson, one of the most famous Barker's beauties, sued him for sexual harassment. The story she told was nothing like the cheerful world people saw on screen. Parkinson claimed that, after the death of his wife, Barker pushed her into a sexual relationship that lasted for years. The message was always hanging in the air: sleep with him, or risk losing your place on the show. She said she was forced into oral sex in his dressing room, and went along with things she did not truly want because she feared being fired. Parkinson asked for $8 million in damages. She claimed Barker used his total control over the show to keep her trapped. While in public, he continued playing the sweet, grandfatherly host everyone adored. To her, it felt less like a relationship and more like a threat wrapped inside a deal. In 1995, Parkinson dropped the lawsuit, even though she still insisted her claims were true. She said she simply could not afford to keep fighting a man with Barker's money, fame, and influence. The court also fined her and her lawyers for withholding documents, which gave Barker's side room to attack her credibility. In the end, there was no clean ending. What remained was a stain on Barker's image. As the scandal spread, other women connected to the show began sharing what they had seen. Holly Hallstrom, another longtime Barker's beauty, described the atmosphere behind the scenes as chaotic and deeply unpleasant. She spoke of constant yelling, jealousy, and tension, so thick it no longer felt like the set of a happy game show. Hallstrom said Barker told her his version of the accusations, and she felt what he shared was even darker than what the public had heard. A 2026 docu-series. In April 2026, the docu-series Dirty Rotten Scandals, The Price is Right, brought fresh attention to the Barker era and gave former models a chance to speak on camera in a new way. They described a backstage culture where women's bodies were constantly judged, where tiny things could bring punishment, and where making Barker unhappy could cost someone her job. One former model said staff were told they could not stare at the Barker's beauties for more than 10 seconds, which only made the environment sound even stranger and more disturbing. The series also connected the harassment claims to broader accusations of sexism and racism, with some people saying contestants were chosen through crude stereotypes. By the 2020s, these stories no longer felt like old gossip. They felt like part of a much bigger pattern. One more example of how abuse could hide behind charm, fame, and a trusted public image. The animal rights crusader. Yet Barker's story was never simple. Because while these accusations darkened his legacy, another side of his life made him a hero to many. Long before it was common, Bob Barker became a vegetarian. The change began with his wife, Dorothy Jo. After seeing the cruelty of slaughterhouses during a trip, she gave up meat first. Barker slowly followed her lead. By 1982, he had attached that belief to his public life in a way millions would remember forever. At the end of every episode of The Price is Right, he urged viewers to help control the pet population by having their pets spayed or neutered. Night after night, year after year, he repeated that message until it became part of American culture. In 2004, Barker gave $1 million to Columbia Law School to launch its animal rights law program, the first of its kind. Later, he gave support to similar efforts at other major schools. A game show host was helping shape the future of animal rights law. The Happy Gilmore surprise. In 1996, at age 72, Barker appeared in Happy Gilmore and turned a simple cameo into one of the most unforgettable comedy moments of the decade. Adam Sandler pushed hard to get him. Barker agreed and revealed something few expected. He had trained in martial arts for years with his friend Chuck Norris. He insisted on doing the fight scene himself with no stunt double. Barker committed fully in cold Canadian weather on wet ground. He wrestled, punched, and tumbled with Sandler, while the crew watched this polished television legend transform into an aggressive, hilarious screen fighter. The scene became instantly famous. It connected Barker to a younger generation and gave him a new kind of pop culture immortality. The final days. On October 31, 2006, at age 82, Barker announced his retirement. He said he wanted to leave while the show was still successful and while he was still young enough to enjoy life. His final taping arrived on June 6, 2007. Fans camped out for days just to get inside. Contestants who made it on stage were overwhelmed. Some cried. Some shook as they spoke to him. His final goodbye was incredibly short. He thanked viewers for inviting him into their homes for 50 years, repeated his message about spaying and neutering pets, and said goodbye. No long speech. No dramatic farewell. The quietness of it made it feel final. Then, in August 2023, the final chapter arrived. Bob Barker died peacefully at his Hollywood Hills home on August 26, just a few months short of his 100th birthday. He had been dealing privately with Alzheimer's disease, along with health issues that included skin cancer and injuries from falls. He did not want a funeral or a public memorial. Instead, he requested a quiet burial beside his wife, Dorothy Jo. When his bronze headstone was placed in September 2024 at Forest Lawn Memorial Park, it was simple. It read only, Robert W. Barker, 1923 to 2023. His final words. In one of his final recorded reflections, Barker said he hoped people would remember him as a man who loved all living things and tried to make the world better for animals while also doing a lot of television shows. That line says everything about how he saw himself. Not first as a celebrity, not first as a television giant, but as someone who cared deeply about suffering and wanted to use his fame for something that mattered. However, even after his death, the arguments around his legacy did not fade. The 2026 docu-series, Dirty Rotten Scandals, The Price is Right, reopened the painful questions about what kind of man Barker really was behind the scenes. Former models described a workplace full of harassment, creepy behavior, and complaints that were brushed aside. Some defended him, others painted a deeply ugly picture. That clash is now part of his story too. He could be a passionate animal advocate and also a man accused of causing real harm to women around him. He could be generous, disciplined, and influential while also leaving behind stories that are hard to hear and impossible to ignore. What did Bob Barker's final words truly reveal? Perhaps not a single truth, but a contradiction. A man who saved thousands of animals and was accused of harming dozens of women. A man who begged America to care for the vulnerable while allegedly exploiting those in his own employ. His final chill is, this the kindest voice on television may have been hiding the darkest secrets. And a man who asked us to control the pet population could not control his own power. That is the legacy Bob Barker left behind. And that is why his final words still chill us to the bone. Subscribe to keep uncovering the truth behind the legends. Thanks for watching.